Welcome everyone to Sustainable Events Masterclass hosted by NetNada with special guest Concada, who we will introduce in a second. I'd like to start off though by acknowledging Indigenous elders past, present and emerging on which the land that we gather on here in Sydney and everywhere else where everyone is situated today. Start off as a bit of an introduction to today's agenda. This is very much covering any sustainability piece, whether we're looking at it in an industry specific such as events, is still a very broad piece. There's so many moving parts, so many layers. But today we're really going to still keep it top picture, but with a bit more of a focus on how you can kind of be front of the pack rather than beginning to elevate your understanding. Start with introducing my co-host here, Chatan, in a second. Then we look at what is sustainable event planning. How do we set our emissions boundaries and the materiality, what's relevant, the inclusion. There's a lot of interchangeable phrases in that section, which I think just identifying them makes it easier. Then we're going to look at some of the key emission sources. What are the levers we can pull to host a sustainable event and reduce them, such as green venues, transport. We're going to hear from Chatan as well in regards to food and catering, his specialty. We'll look at energy conservation, waste management, and then kind of tie it all a bit together at the end on how to run a sustainable event and some tools and resources available to you. Without further ado, though, I will hand it over to Chatan to introduce himself.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Alex. Hey everyone, my name is Chetan, or Chet for short. I'm a data scientist, a chef, and the founder of Concada. And that's a social enterprise in the sustainable event space, which I'll talk more about later. But a quick disclaimer, firstly, I'm currently also helping the government shape some very important climate policy in the insurance sector. But I have to disclose that today I'm speaking purely in my capacity as founder of Concada and not as an employee at the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. But yeah, I guess on Concada, we basically help events become more nature positive by helping event organizers, like many of you guys on the line, find more sustainable vendors like venues, catering, waste management, decorators, merchandise, and so on. And same as NetNada, we measure the sustainability of our vendors using data so that event organizers, again, like many of you here, can make informed and evidence-based decisions. And I think Concada and NetNada came today here because of the alignment and how we think, that the best way to navigate this world of sustainability is through measurement and evidence and database. So that's going to be kind of the ongoing theme in the sustainable events masterclass is how can you use numbers to drive some of these actions. So yeah, thank you all for coming today. And if you have any questions, like we said, just pop them in the chat below and we'll be answering them at the end. So back to you, Alex.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chet. So any problems with the government's sustainability policy, please don't take it up with Chet. We'll be discussing some regulatory influence and opportunities in a moment. But yeah, look, as Chet mentioned, and essentially the functionality of Concada really speaks to the fact that sustainability is a team game. It is about collaboration. Event sustainability, even more so. And that's actually something that's really exciting. We've got people from all different aspects of event services, suppliers. So we're going to look at how everyone can work together, identify that kind of network of sustainable suppliers, and overall deliver a really, really exciting sustainable event. So NetNada as well, in way of introduction, my name's Alex. I'm head of customer success at NetNada. My role at NetNada is very much focused in delivering carbon accounts, the actual implementation of carbon accounting, whether it be for mandatory reporting, whether it be for individual events. And doing so has really allowed me to get a lot of great experience and insights across a number of really, really interesting events. Working in the event space is very interesting. It's a lot more interesting sometimes than calculating the carbon emissions of very, very large, complicated corporate bodies. And that's things like Robbie Williams International Tour, Laneway Festival, Lime Cordiale. We've done a lot in sport. Very lucky to work very closely with the ICC to do a number of events there. Built custom event calculators for the Gold Coast Convention Centre. And then we also partner with a lot of event companies. When we say event companies, more like event producers who are usually pulling all of these suppliers together and helping them to measure the carbon emissions and, have not just a sustainable event that says, we recycle or we don't use, plastic packaging, but to have a sustainable event that's really in line with sustainability in 2024, 2025 and beyond, contributing to the decarbonisation of society. There's rapid growth in this space. There's a reason why we have a pretty packed house today on this webinar. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of interest. And we really think it's coming from three areas. First is that an event is the most public representation a brand can have. Even a potentially very slow to act, sustainably stunted company, when they have an event these days, is going to want to put their best foot forward in this sense, whether that be the minimization we're seeing across potentially promotional products that are just one use to, how you deliver your event. There's a lot of visibility, there's a lot of scrutiny, and in that case, there's a lot of opportunity for people to kind of be putting their best foot forward. Same sort of thing with regulatory demands. We're seeing the mandatory reporting requirements come into Australia in effect in January 1st. There is a massive ripple effect across all markets and across all industries as to how that is then coming into play with how people make decisions around where they spend their money, how they report. And, overall, events contribute to 10% of carbon emissions worldwide. It is a big lever for people to pull. And when we say lever, we mean what are the opportunities to reduce? And as we touched on a second, it's not always possible to reduce your emissions. But luckily, in the case of events, there is a lot of opportunity. Accessibility in tech, again, through companies like NetNada, through companies like Concada, there is a lot of opportunity to actually make a difference here. And it's not something that's just relegated to these massive market-leading companies who can really make a difference. It's something that, from one people groups to large, even listed companies, you can make a difference through technology and understanding. Chet, anything else for you to touch on there?
No, not at this stage. I think you covered it all.
Great. Planning a sustainable event, as mentioned earlier, like this interconnection of services and the huge variety of reduction levers is what makes it all so exciting. We can all work together here to actually deliver a really exciting outcome. Often when NetNada, we'll get into a company and it may be an accounting services company that works out of a WeWork-like situation in the city with 10, 15 employees. They can't really do anything to reduce their carbon emissions. It's very, very stunted with the impact they can have, even if they're wanting to do something to make a difference. Obviously, there is always solutions for each company, but with events, there is so much opportunity. So much opportunity, as we're going to touch on in a second. And the first step is assessing what is deemed relevant. And this is also known as, materiality, as some of you may refer to it. And what is in control through that? What is in control of the event organizers of the event for us to understand what we should focus on reducing or focus on measuring? Then there's decide how you will measure. There's a lot of methods of measurement through spend-based, activity-based data. And then there's the third, which we really think it should be a collaborative approach to how you reduce your impact. So planning a sustainable event, assess, decide, collaborate, lots of different ways to position it. But the first step, really is that assessment, understanding your boundaries, understanding what you can control. So there are so many different decision trees, processes, inclusion, exclusion exercises to determine what is material, what is relevant, what you should measure, what you should look at reducing. This decision tree I really like. It's a really, really easy to understand one that comes from Isla over in the UK. And is money being spent directly? Yes. Direct spend include. Is money being spent on your behalf? Yes. Then it's still, indirect spend. It's influenced by the event. Would this activity occur if you weren't part of the event? No, then we need to include it. So if it's not being spent on our behalf, we're not spending it directly, and it would occur without us, then you can generally exclude it from there. And this will be a bit more obvious with the application of a decision tree such as this, when I go over the emission sources in a second, and there's like what we control, what we influence, what's attributable. Carbon, I would just preface as well, without getting too much into the weeds of carbon accounting. I actually believe, and I've said it many times, that the term carbon accounting can be a bit misleading in the sense that accounting is so binary, it's correct or incorrect. Carbon accounting is an iterative process. How can we slowly get a much stronger measurement? From the first measurement we do to the last is going to look very, very different. So it's really putting your best foot forward and being transparent and using frameworks such as these to be heading in the right direction. And to head in the right direction, and we'll come back to this decision tree in a second, to head in the right direction and to take these positive steps is to have a better understanding. What are the key emission sources and data points that come out of an event that we now know about, so then we now can have a bit more of an educated approach to our planning as to what we can reduce? Energy, waste, transport, freight, food and beverage, accommodation, staging build, supplies in general, attendee travel. These are all some of the bigger ones, but there are more that fall outside of this. And what we've kind of included, and we're going to send over these slides at another time, is what are the data points within there? Because if we can understand that at its base level what the data points are, then we can have a bit more of a intelligent approach to how we could reduce them. Because the energy, it's our venue energy consumption. Same with waste, it's how our waste is disposed, the weight and volume of our waste. Same with food and beverage, and Chetan, the expert here, he'll touch on that in a second. But accommodation, the number of nights stayed, material sourced from our staging and our build, number of flights taken or distance traveled for our attendee travel. If we understand that these are all the different data points that are required to capture, then we can go, okay, well, we know we need to be working with a venue that has lower energy consumption, or we know we need to be working with a venue that has type and quantity of waste tracking available. We'll come back to that slide in a second, but there is obviously a carbon accounting consideration as to all this data is not always available. You can use a spend-based or activity-based approach to capture it, but we'll get to that in a second. We also have the NetNada emissions calculator, which we'll send after this. And this is a climate active aligned, enriched with NetNada insights that's free to use, that you can input some metrics from your event to estimate what the emissions may be for a lot of these kind of like main key emission sources. Chad, have you got anything you'd like to jump into? I know when we get to the food, you're going to take it away for a little bit, but...
No, I'll let you power through for now. You're doing great.
Green venues and facilities. Look, like anything with event planning, so just like event planning, sustainable event planning, it's important to have time on your side. Two of the major considerations, or two of the major decisions that need to come well before the event, or obviously is the choice of venue. Obviously, you can't have your event without your venue, but the facilities within a venue are very, very influential upon how you can reduce your energy, or how you can influence your waste, or more often how you can influence your food and beverage as well. This decision is where you will also draw a lot of the data points from these different emission sources. I'll use ICC as an example. We work very closely with the ICC, and I recently did an analysis for Monday.com's conference at the ICC. We were able to very closely track the waste because we could see the waste streams and how they were estimated in the different spaces. They had the electricity consumption broken down by location within the conference center, and it also allowed us to have a lower than industry average impact on our waste, water, and also the food as well. They're able to give us much more data on food. If you just went to a local kind of, I don't know, any sort of venue that couldn't give you this information, and we all know how difficult it can often be drawing the information from the managers or the gatekeeper at these venues, then your hands are tied essentially with what you can measure, what you can report, and then how you can actually demonstrate your reduction. So it's a big decision. Sustainable travel, again, this is the other consideration that needs to be made before the event. Sustainable travel can be up to 40 to 70%, depending on the type of event that you're hosting. If you're hosting an international conference with lots of people flying in, obviously they fall within the materiality boundaries. All of those flights come into account. It's obviously very difficult to reduce those flights, but the first step is to be calculating and having a close analysis as to how the makeup of your travel actually looks like. So the reason I say this needs to be done beforehand is that it's very difficult to get a survey travel engagement form completed post-event. As you can imagine, people just don't really care. They don't want to fill it out. Also, if you can get it done pre-event, you can actually have a bit of an understanding of how people are going to get there. That understanding can lead you into the decision as to whether you actually have a pre-event communication strategy of saying these are the public transport options to get to our venue, or let's encouraging carpool as an example. It also shows you, and this is with every aspect of gathering data and having a data point to dive into, is it shows you whether it's worth investing your time and energy. Chet and I worked recently, as you'll touch on in a second, on World Vegan Day markets and doing World Vegan Day and doing the analysis there over at CourageWorks. But what we found was from the pre-survey data that the vast majority of people are actually getting public transport there already. So if they're already getting public transport there and the venue is very, very accessible, it's okay, well, let's actually put our energy into reducing another lever, wherever they may be. And this is where, sophisticated sustainable event planners or sophisticated sustainable events are using carbon metrics or even any other available sustainability metric to guide their decisions and to guide who they work with. Waste management is obviously a really big one. How we're tracking our waste, how we're diverting waste from landfill, whether that's into organic bins, whether it's into recycling bins. Having good tracking really allows you as well to benchmark your efforts. Something that's to think about as well is to not be holding your events in silo from one another. Okay, this is the waste breakdown that we achieved on event 1. How do we then change that in event 2 or event 3? That's also a really big hallmark of what we're seeing the leaders doing, generating their own internal benchmarks and internal data sets so that going forward, they can really look at how to make a difference. This is a team effort as well. You're working with the venues, you're working with the hospitality partners. Any opportunity for circular economy initiatives for waste goes hand in hand with stage builds. We're seeing a lot of people doing exciting stuff in the stage and exhibition stand building, making sure they're using recycled products, getting second, third, fourth lives out of their different materials, so that when you're actually purchasing a different exhibition stand or stage, it's not just being purely built for that occasion. There's a lot of opportunity in waste, and doesn't actually, interestingly enough, have the highest carbon emissions impact. However, it's something that's really tangible for your attendees. It's really tangible to reduce. Just quickly on additional suppliers, because there are a lot of people involved in an event who fall outside of, these major sources that we broke down. It might be like your technology partner. It might be the speakers that you're paying to come across. It might be, the gifts that you give out, promotional products. Now, a lot of the time, all of those additional suppliers, it's very hard to gather what's called, supplier-specific data or activity-based data as to, the materials used or the weight. And this is when, for these additional suppliers, it's really important to be using like a spend-based analysis. And if you don't know the difference between like spend-based, activity-based, emission factors, all that kind of aspect, I really encourage you to come along in 2 weeks' time to our Carbon Accounting 101 session, which is going to be focused primarily on events. The one thing I did want to point out, because I have this conversation all the time, and I think it's really important for people to wrap their head around, is that, using the spend-based analysis, which is just looking at how many dollars are spent on a certain activity, inputting that into an emission factor and giving you a reading. People are like, how is that accurate? Like, why should I be using it? I should be going out to try and get, the weight or like the technology type that AV1 used within the service they provided to me. Well, this is when the awkwardly placed decision-making tree comes into effect. But this is from the GHG protocols, and it's one of the last things I'll just quickly touch on before handing over to Chet. It's that based on what data is available to you, it's actually less accurate to be trying to do a rudimentary desktop analysis based on the individual product or service that a certain supplier provided you. It's because, and I guess I'll use a promotional product example. We may have bought 1,000 swag giveaway bags to hand out at the end, and we try and say, okay, well, each bag is 90% plastic, and we know that plastic has an embodied emission profile of X, and there was Y were left behind, and trying to put together some rudimentary formula. It doesn't properly reflect the emissions, and you're actually much safer and it's much more accurate to be using the spend-based method. Unless we have this average data method, unless we have these other methods available to us, the GHG protocols, which is how countries and governments are expected to align with when they calculate their carbon emissions, that they're saying to use the spend-based method. And this is where, we talked about earlier, like the use of technology, that allows us to really capture the real impact of an event, and not just look at kilograms of waste, but look at every supplier and how that supplier has impacted, the emissions of our event. It's a bit of a rabbit hole, the whole calculation and the carbon accounting of it. Again, as mentioned, please come along to the next call. But the point I'm trying to make is there's all these different emission sources. We also need to take into consideration where our event is spending money, and where our event is spending money is, as that decision tree showed earlier on, that is a material emission source, and we need to make sure that we're calculating it. Chet, I'll hand it over to you to your area of expertise on the sustainable catering and food, and hearing about World Vegan Day.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Alex. And that was very comprehensive. And again, I feel like there was a lot of information to digest there. So just going to take a quick pause. And again, if you have any questions on any of that, just feel free to articulate that and check in the comments below. But yeah, I'll be touching on the last bit of the equation, which is around catering and food. And this is an important area as well, because food is a very complex topic, I would say. And depending on who you ask, it actually makes up around 20 to 30% of emissions globally. So it's a big deal. And when you think of the sustainability of catering, there's a lot of aspects to that value chain. You got to think from the farm to the kitchen, to your plate, to the landfill, and all the transportation that's happening in between. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it makes it tricky to understand, well, what are the areas that you should focus on, right? You're going to hear lots of conflicting advice. Some will say buy locally, some say avoid red meat or stop using plastic packaging. And they're all valid ideas, but they all have different levels of impact. And so again, this is where, the data comes in, because using data and evidence, especially when you have limited time or funds or options, it's important to understand, what can you do that will have the most impact, right? So I know there's a lot on the screen, but just drawing your attention to that top right chart, it shows the life cycle stages that contribute to the sustainability of food. And I based it on a few different scientific articles. But what you'll see is that the farming stage, so that's like growing the ingredients, so like the plants or raising the animals, that makes up the majority of emissions. So between 50 to 70% of the total carbon footprint comes from the farming stage of food. And so it's really important to focus on that area. And if you look across different ingredients in the bottom chart, you'll find that plant-based foods tend to have a much lower footprint compared to animal-based. Like a steak will have maybe 20 times the footprint of carbon dioxide release compared to the same amount of tofu, for example. So that's why if you were to just make one change that would make the most impact, that would actually be from ensuring the majority of the foods at your event would be vegetarian or vegan. And just as a reference point, and the largest universities like UNSW, they already have requirements like this, so that I think UNSW has that 75% of their catering at any of their events needs to be vegetarian. So considering things like that in your sustainability policies. Another area is waste. And I've listed a few tips here in how you can reduce the waste in your events. So things like using reusable plates where possible, or even just avoiding plates and cutlery altogether by trying to serve finger foods. But if neither of those are an option, then using biodegradable, compostable, or recyclable packaging. For drinks, you can consider using jugs and reusable glasses rather than plastic bottles and single-use coffee cups. And it's also worth having a think about food waste, because when that gets sent to landfill, it creates methane, which is many times worse than carbon dioxide in terms of its global warming potential. So reducing food waste, I would say first is to avoid over ordering. And a good way to do that is to get RSVPs for your events to get a better idea of how many people are actually going to come, but then also keep track of how many people usually drop off in your past events. So, like maybe 20% of people won't actually turn up. That'll help you get better at estimating for future orders as well. And the last point here is just around food miles. And this is kind of a more obvious point, but ordering from more nearby restaurants rather than someone from across town will help reduce that footprint. So maybe just going to the next slide. I've touched on many things, and I've worked with many different event organizers, and I understand that often you don't have the time or the information from every supplier or all this data modeling to do this analysis and all this thinking every time. And that's kind of why we started Concada. It's, we're working around with roughly 20 chefs around Sydney. And what we do is we get all of that data, all that information on what ingredients they're using, where do they get it from, do they cook with gas or induction, do they use solar power, all of that stuff. And then for event planners that are organizing an event, we help them connect with someone that's the best fit for their event in terms of the menu and the vibe, and in their budget as well. So, and then the last point is, unlike many caterers, we also actually provide the data and the evidence to kind of show the actual sustainability rather than just claiming it. So you can kind of see in the photo here, this is a event we did just 2 weeks ago, which is for the Nature Conservation Council, and it was a big event for roughly 100 people. But all of our food labels that showed what was in the food, it also showed the carbon footprint. And this example here of the plant-based chicken sandwiches we had, it had roughly 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of the food, which is roughly 38% less than if it was just regular chicken sandwiches. So evidence-based is the way to go. So yeah, shameless.
This is really good. Like, just to add on to Chetan, like what we were talking about before, connecting and working with different suppliers who can not only implement sustainable options or alternatives like Chet and Concada have done here. This is also just such gold when you're wanting to report and demonstrate that you've made sustainable initiatives for an event, rather than just saying, oh, we served up some vegetarian options. It's like we've actually made a conscious decision to work with someone who's tracking the carbon emissions, who is an expert in the field, who knows what they're doing. And it just adds so much more legitimacy to the whole concept of holding a sustainable event. And we've worked with Chet before, and then it's actually, at the end of the day as well, really, really delicious food, which is a good plus.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and like I said before, I'm a chef as well. So I mean, the priority is also good quality food. So yeah, shameless plug. If you ever do need delicious, sustainable catering for your events, just feel free to reach out. I'm sure Alex will circulate my details after. But moving on to the case study. So just taking a step back from all of this, we've talked about a number of areas that make up an event's footprint, from transport to waste, energy, suppliers, food. And Alex is going to talk about this a bit more, but the key message here is, you can't measure, so you can't manage what you can't measure. There's, being an event planner, there's an infinite number of decisions you can make in terms of putting an event together. And it's like, where should your attention be? Which should you be focusing more on, the transport or the waste or the food? And I think that's why part of the first step of the equation is firstly understanding just like what are all the things that are going into it, just laying them out. And then if you can, even doing a bit of quantification to kind of prioritize, where are the most impact areas. So bringing that to life, recently, Concada and NetNada, we worked together to measure the footprint of the World Vegan Day markets. And like Alex said, like we didn't want this to just be another carbon accounting exercise that, we just produce a number and it goes in some file somewhere. We saw it as an exercise to, help Vegan New South Wales understand what are the actions or levers that are available to them, and what of those actions will have the most impact. And Alex already mentioned before, like we originally thought, looking at the results that 5 to 6 kilos per person of CO2, and most of that is coming from transportation. But when we looked really under the hood, yeah, majority of people already coming to that venue were coming by transport, and it's like, okay, maybe that's not the lowest hanging fruit. And then we looked at kind of the food and drinks in that area, and it was a vegan market, so already a lot of the footprint was quite reduced. So looking through this, we kind of proposed some other solutions more around, say, the waste management and kind of how they can help reduce the food waste and some of the packaging waste and some of these things. But I think the point being, just again, going through this thinking helps you identify what impacts will you get the most bang for your buck. Where can you get the most impact for the dollars and the time that you're going to spend? Because understand that time and resources are scarce, and especially in sustainability for smaller businesses, especially, you got to find the highest impact areas and really focus on them. So yeah, that was a case study we did. If you have any questions on it, again, check it in the chat, but I'll hand it back to you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Chet. And another aspect to kind of wrap your head around if you're a bit newer to the event sustainability and even business organizational sustainability as a whole is that we are still quite limited by technologies and efficiencies on how much we can reduce. There is a base of with which we can't reduce past, and I gave the accounting companies example earlier before. So where wins really should be celebrated and where sustainability improvements are also available is in improving your data, having much more granular understanding of the impact of your event, which allows you to then identify these measures, these opportunities beyond just saying, we know that lots coming from waste. It's hard for us to reduce our waste because we're limited by the venue we're at. But if you could actually understand more of the split of your waste, then it allows you to open up opportunities like stakeholder engagement or raising conversations with the venue. There's so much more to do once you have the more granular data. So we always encourage people to celebrate those wins of getting closer, better data sets, because it is something that takes time and effort, but it is an integral part of having a sustainable event.
Yeah. And just before you move on, Alex, that was a really good point. You reminded me, I think one of the other wins I feel like that came out of this event we did, beyond kind of just like the behind the scenes, reducing the footprint and measuring it, is so we actually got to present on the day in front of a few hundred people. And there was a bit of an educational piece around the people attending the events, kind of showing them our thinking and all the stuff we've been up to. And I think for event organizers, I think there's a really good opportunity here in not necessarily taking on that full burden on yourselves in having to be fully responsible. It's like engaging the other stakeholders, including the people attending the event, in how like the responsibility that they have in supporting that sustainability. So, like I said before, the food labels and things like that, that's one way. Another way we did on this event day is we actually raised funds from the people attending the event. Being like, your footprint of attending today is like 5 to 6 kilos of CO2. And if we kind of raise enough funds for like, I think it was like 300 trees or something like that, then we can sequester that carbon back into the ground. So we were able to raise funds for that, and also towards saving the Murray-Darling Basin and birds in the New South Wales Riverina. But people felt from the feedback we got quite empowered and engaged with this topic of sustainability, much more so than when it's just an event organizer doing an initiative that the attendees can't really contribute to or be involved in. So just another suggestion in terms of actually engaging your stakeholders and the event attendees in that whole journey.
Exactly right. And that's a good point, Chet. And we've kind of actually just touched on these points, but what I think is also to remember is like, why are you hosting a sustainable event? And we're not here to say that you need to be hosting a sustainable event because your life is just embedded in the ethics and the moral quest for better sustainability and decarbonization. Like there is a lot of opportunity and money to be made and partnerships to be grown and really successful leading companies to work with by having an understanding of how to hold a sustainable event. It's a huge opportunity that's coming up, and not often do massive opportunities also be hand in hand with, really great branding exercises to hold sustainable events. So if it is around they want to hold a sustainable event because they want to engage the community of people who are coming along, and they want to demonstrate that they're a brand who cares, a big part of the sustainable event is around that communication and engagement piece. It's around making sure that you have all of the data and the communications prepared pre-event so that you can then communicate like, Chet did at the World Vegan Day and tied in a nice presentation that ran everyone through it. Goes back to this part of, what we believe really good sustainability is not just doing a calculation and putting it in a folder somewhere. It's using it to empower people, whether that be stakeholders who have engaged you to host a sustainable event, or whether it's your attendees. So to do that, just like any event, successful event, setting the goals and objectives, making sure you're conducting the sustainability assessment, leveraging tools like NetNada. Again, we obviously do carbon measurement for events. We very often partner with either the event producer, the event itself, or the venue even, to fill that measurement consulting communication piece as well. So we're also always open just for a question or a chat, as we'll do at the end here, but anything over email, you're more than welcome. And then obviously the ideal place to be getting towards is to have that centralized data point of carbon and how we can reduce, and that can contribute to other aspects or organizations. But even if you can't calculate the carbon for it, understanding what those major impacts and sources are will put you on the right path to hosting a sustainable event.
Yeah,
We'll,
and
yeah, sorry, Chet,
just
you go.
just touching on a point you made around, I guess, also the motivation of trying to make these events more sustainable. I think another one which I've kind of uncovered accidentally is some of the event organizers that I worked with, by kind of going through this process and doing this thinking, they were actually able to find opportunities to reduce costs as well for themselves.
Mm.
And I think that that one is a good one, that it can help engage broader stakeholders in the business, because money talks, and it's really great when you can align the financial goals and sustainable goals as well. But I think part of it is just kind of, you're collecting this data, you're better understanding your supply chain, understanding all the different options available to you. And just by doing that homework, whether it's, for venues, it's like the power providers, or for companies with their waste management, sometimes, disposable things have a cost, and reusable things after a certain number of uses are actually cheaper. So there are opportunities sometimes where those financial and sustainable outcomes align, but part of that first step is just doing the homework and understanding where that is. So
Yeah, look, and that's obviously the sweet spot. Whenever we can identify those areas where there is a cost and a emission saving, that's where we'll always really work with clients to bore into first, because it's the easiest thing to push through internal decisions. And it also allows you to have that really, really strong communication piece where it's like, as an example, we've changed waste suppliers because we know that they can reduce the waste that goes to landfill by 20%, and we have to pay for all waste that goes to landfill. Instead of saying that, we've made a decision to change to this waste provider because it's going to reduce our waste emissions by 20%. It's the same with energy, same with all these things, and all of a sudden you can tie into these decisions into sustainable initiatives. In terms of resources that we'll send today, we'll send the access to the event calculator. I'm also going to put together a template event emissions report. So it'll be like a Canva template you guys can just take and drop your own logos in, and it will show you the different emission sources. We'll send you the session recording, as well as some details on World Vegan Day, and also Chet and Concade's details, and then just like a NetNada information pack if you want to learn more there. That's it for the moment. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. so I can see the Q&A better.
Mhm.
Um, please jump in with any questions you may have. Francesca has shared the event emissions calculator and other tools. Um, sorry, I missed this, but can you elaborate on how more accurate to use spend amount for a supplier if the emission sources come from different places? For instance, for furniture, does it account for the furniture comes from interstate versus local, or if a product, the actual makeup, or its recyclability? There are different emission factors for different locations, and spend-based analysis can reflect that. However, it is more of an industry average generally. So if you are working with more sustainable suppliers, and wanting to get a more accurate input into your analysis, what we can work with you to do is what's considered supply chain engagement, where we can request sustainability documentation from them, whether that's like an EPD or an LCA. Again, I would say, Alyssa, come along to our carbon accounting 101 session in 2 weeks. We'll send you the invitation. We're going to break down much more exactly what to do if you can't get this piece of data, what's a better supplement, and so on. It's also the companies, and if you are a company as well, this is actually just another good point to kind of spin it on its head. Most of the companies who are doing this emissions calculation, doing scope 1, 2, and 3, they'll be doing their analysis. The majority will be through spend-based analysis. They'll see your company as an example come pop up in their supply chain, and they will just be using an industry average to calculate your emissions. Now, if you're someone who is taking sustainability seriously, wanting to really take the next step, if you were to do your own analysis, you could then deliver to them this much more accurate figure beyond an industry average. It's something to think about. We'll, again, excuse me as I get down into the rabbit hole of carbon accounting, but a list of venues that you suggest for venues large and small, we are actually putting that together. So it is something that a lot of our clients and network are asking for. So Felicity will message you separately as to where you're located, but we have it, but it's just not organized at the moment. So we're just putting that together at the moment. For travel and air travel, is there an aviation company? Well, one thing to note is that traveling economy is generally 3 times less emissions than traveling business. So if you've got to let your corporate team know to jump into economy, that's always a good way to reduce those emissions. But no, there isn't at the moment. Until those biofuel is innovated, we are a little bit hamstrung on the air travel. Man, thanks. Yeah, it's great to know more about Concada as well. Thanks, Felicity.
Yeah, happy to talk about that question about
Yep.
the steps we take to reduce emissions as well, because I've touched on a few aspects. So I think when we're kind of curating menus and making up packages for this sustainable catering, I think one of the biggest things is, like I mentioned, it's all plant-based, but making sure it's still delicious at the same time. But the other ones we've been kind of working with is the packaging and making sure it's kind of biodegradable, or we do actually have some that can do in reusable crockery and stuff depending on where you're based. Also, one of the things we do, given we have a network of so many different chefs and restaurants, is like finding one that's close to you so that the transport emissions are lower. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you have an event coming up, even if it's just for a free consultation. We're not we actually get paid by our chefs and the restaurants we work with, so it's a free service for you. But yeah, happy to connect and just chat about it.
Definitely. It's such a good high visibility aspect of event sustainability, food and catering. So, and it's food, it's waste, it's so many different aspects.
Yeah. We have a question here in the Q&A as well. How can I engage my suppliers and partners to help reduce the environmental impact of my events, especially when some of them are not yet focused on sustainability? And I think that's a really, really good question because, especially for events, it's a lot of the indirect emissions that are coming from your suppliers and partners, and often you don't really have control or visibility over them. For me, I found that it kind of helps just communicating that when you're at that procurement stage that, sustainability is important to me. Kind of what's your commitment to this? Often many suppliers, especially in the hospitality space, aren't really at the point where they'll give you data. But even just understanding more qualitatively, like what are the practices that they take to ensure sustainability. And I think even if the answer is that they don't get back, I think just by kind of constantly putting that out there, it'll signal that demand in the market. Alex, I don't know if you have any input on how to better engage suppliers on that.
No, definitely. I think, as you mentioned, Jet, the only thing I would say as well is it can really help to have just essentially a set of questions that you ask suppliers to. What we usually do is have a set of, again, kind of ESG based, but mainly E focused questions that form the basis of your sustainable procurement policy. It just makes the engagement process a little less tiring. If you want to go out and canvas, especially everyone you're currently working with. In terms of engaging suppliers, we find that it's actually very easy the first time off because you just want to go out and speak to everyone you've already worked with rather than trying to find new suppliers, because you might be surprised as to what some of the people within your initial network are actually doing. Or your request might be that final step for them to say, hey, you know what, I've been requested like 4 times right now. I'm going to start doing things a bit better. Online events, should we worry about the emissions of those? There is still an emissions profile for online events. It is much lower, obviously. Again, worrying about the emissions on those, let's think back to the reason why you're hosting a sustainable event. Is it for your own interest of putting forward sustainable events? Is it a request from a supplier? Is it a request from the host or sponsor? And then, but obviously, the food, energy, travel, that's all essentially eliminated. There is like some small energy, some smaller foods, things like that, but the other supplier costs, and there is a lot lower. But if you're doing the calculation of your online events, it also allows you to then more comfortably say in market that we've chosen to go online because we want to reduce the emissions, not just circling back and saying it's a low emissions event because it's an online. You got to kind of be walking the walk a little bit to make those claims. Cool.
Cool. I think that's all the questions at the moment.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. Oh, we got one more. Has Concada inserted themselves into kitchens during live events to oversee waste separation, i.e., food organic separated from general waste, which is often cheaper? Yeah, great question. Well, the last event I actually went to at the Nature Conservation Council, I was overseeing all of it. So I was standing by the bins and making sure people were doing the right thing there, and actually helped a lot of the packaging waste, making sure that goes into the right recycling. It depends is a short answer, but like it depends if we have the people available. Sometimes we're involved in the capacity of just supplying the food, dropping it off, and then we kind of leave. Sometimes when events have budget for kind of people, then we can also be involved in actually being there. We also food waste, you've reminded me, we also have like a bunch of partnerships with a lot of food rescue organizations. So kind of like similar to the Oz Harvest types, who can we can arrange for any leftovers and food waste to be collected from the events, and it sometimes goes to people in need as well. So supporting multiple good causes in one go. But yeah, a short answer, yes, but also depends on the budget.
Great. So for online events, what data do you collect and what do you measure? So we recently did the analysis for Spark Festival, which is a decentralized festival focused at technology and startups in Sydney. When I say decentralized, it's one of those festivals where you can host your own events submitted to the broader umbrella of events, similar to a fringe festival. A lot of them were online. So things we'd be capturing more is around the speaker or the host. What are their work from home emissions or set up for them to have the online event? We'd be looking at if there's any associated marketing costs involved with promoting the event, because then that is input into like a spend-based analysis. Whether there's any other costs associated for hosting the online event, the ticketing, the IT, speaker costs if there are any. But again, all the other more material aspects of traditional events is much lower. So I would, feel free to send me an email separately as to what your online event is if you're thinking about doing some more analysis on it. Again, this isn't a sales pitch here; it's an education piece. We really want to help anyone who has any of these questions. If you do want to work with us in the future, great. But there is so much just to help each other to better understand what's available here. I know Chet's the same. If you have any questions, just shoot them over to him.
Yep, more than happy to help. But yeah, I guess that might wrap up today's session. So thank you everyone for coming. It was really good to connect with you all, even if it was virtually.
Yeah.
And yeah, hope to see you around again.
Yeah.
Alex.
Thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. Again, we'll send out more all of those resources, and any questions, shoot them over. But thank you so much for spending your Wednesday lunch with us.